Hello everybody, so I am in Steph Hafferty's garden with Steph Hafferty, who is here, and we have had I have had a load of people saying to me, what does building soil mean? So I'm going to do just a little bit of, I'm going to do a bit of an explanation. I thought I might just as well bring you to the queen of building soil in her garden, and we can talk about what building soil means. So here we go. So this is Steph's garden, which is absolutely beautiful. It's only been this kind of garden since March, and she has been building soil. And what that means is not digging and building the soil to be a healthy ecosystem. But rather than me talk about it, I'm going to pass over to Steph. So Steph, tell me how you've been building soil in this space.
Okay, well, here I've been using different methods to create my growing areas. In the back garden, I've used cardboard on top of the weedy grass and then 5 centimetres of compost that I bought in because I moved here from Somerset. It's a long way from Somerset to Wales, and I knew when I got here I wouldn't have any compost. And part of my move was budgeting for that, and I chose an organic peat-free compost to do that. And that is how I set up that particular garden. And that's been cropping now since April when I started, well, not cropping since April, I started it in April. And it's full and it's cropping now. Whereas here in the orchard, I'm experimenting with different ways of building soil and creating productive growing spaces, using some things that I've brought in, so some of it's compost, and other things were either given to me or already here, such as this little Hugel-ish thing. It's not really a complete Hugel, it's got no bits of wood underneath. It's made from brash, from having had some trees, some fir trees were chopped down because they were hazardous.
Hang on.
Okay.
Fir trees over here, just for reference.
So the wood was logged, anything that could be that chipped was chipped, and there was some brashy stuff that my son raked up because we were having a bit of a party here, and we piled that here, and on top of it is mostly rotted grass, turf, which was the previous people who lived here made a driveway and a parking area by digging up the lawn, and they stacked it all. And so by the time we moved here, it was mostly rotten. So that's one way of doing it, using things that were already here. You can see that weeds are creeping in. And I made this actually for my rhubarb, and I've had all kinds of annual crops on it this year. And next year I'm thinking of making this entirely perennial, but I haven't decided how yet. And down here there's lots of different ways that I made the space. So this is half asparagus, the other half actually died. That was it was
a little bit of reality.
A bit of reality. I thought I was going to have moved before I actually did. That was, you know, the reality of moving house. So I had the asparagus waiting, and it waited a bit long, so half of it needs replanting. But this is some compost and beech wood chip, and the wood chip is going to gradually break down and feed the soil, so it's creating a really rich, particularly in different kinds of fungi, environment for the soil life to thrive. It's one of the deepest beds I made because no-dig asparagus, you get it and spread it out on the surface like a kind of crazy octopus, and then I needed the depth on top, so there's about 6 inches with compost and then all this wood chip. And the wood chip will continually feed the soil as it breaks down. We keep getting different kinds of fungi here. And my yacon is taking over the world.
I mean, this yacon plot is just spectacular.
Yeah, it sat there looking miserable.
Was it just one tuber?
Yeah, that I brought in a pot.
Wow.
And again, that went in, it just sat in a pot looking miserable for a long time. And then suddenly, now it's really happy on a takeover bit of the world.
Good.
So next time you visit here, there'll just be a yacon, I think. This is one of my Dalek compost heaps. So another way of building soil is composting, and I use lots of different methods of composting. Doesn't normally have this on top, but the lid blew away and I haven't found it yet.
I think it's quite pretty.
It gets windy here. And I have quite a lot of Daleks. I really like Daleks because you can put them anywhere. They're easy to move around. I've had these for years, so they're plastic, but they're continual use plastic. They're ideal for smaller spaces. They came here from, I used to grow in my garden in my allotment. And you can stick them right next to where the compost is going to go. And this is a mixture of cardboard and garden waste and kitchen waste. I also have hot bins. I have 2 hot bins which can compost food waste and also weed seeds, so they're really good for things like that. I have 2 bokashi bins which haven't started yet. It's a bit more.
I mean, this is just showing off now.
Because I haven't yet unpacked the bokashi bran. I haven't found it yet. Probably.
I'd have brought mine with me if I'd have known.
And I keep thinking I won't get any more. I won't make any because I'm going to find it any minute now, and I still haven't. But there's lots of different ways that I compost, and I've got the pallets now for making pallet composting heaps. I also have at the bottom of the garden the compost heap of doom, which is one that actually was originally here. And that's for anything that's really weedy, that I'll never actually use the compost heap, but it's made out of netting that sheep fencing. So there's quite big spaces, so wild things can live in it. So it's doom in as much as anything that I wouldn't want to put in a real compost heap that I'm going to use, but it is then gradually breaks down, feeding the environment around it and feeding whoever decides to go and live in it. So the beds were made using different things. There's some alpaca poo that I was given that went down fresh. This one here was cardboard with like an old sheet of clear polythene on the top that came off a mattress. So it needs a little bit of weeding, and I'll mulch it this winter with some of the compost I've made since I got here. This one here are sheep dags. Most of the stuff dags. Okay, the pooey bit of sheep that you can't use.
The nasty bit about their bottoms.
Yeah. So basically it's sheep's fleece and poo. And then all the greenery you can see, that's green manure that I put down because I'm really into bringing in beneficial predators. And that's a brassica. So all the flowers that it produced is going to bring in parasitic wasps and other beneficial predators. Another way I'm building the soil here is with this green manure, this mustard, and here I'm intercropping it with garlic. It's half filled with garlic, and the other half is going to be broad beans, so crops that can go in now.
So if you've got green manure, how do you not dig it in?
Okay, this one will die in the frost.
Okay, cool.
So, and if there's any residue in the spring, I can just rake it up and chuck it in the compost heap. I'll also be using field beans, and those I cut down at ground level. The roots work with the soil life, and that is another way of building soil that will break down slowly. It might be sad because I've chopped it off, you never know. But the bulk part, that can then get chopped up and put in compost heaps. It creates more compost material. And if I decide to leave it a bit and let the flowers grow, then that's early forage for bees, wasps and other wild things. So it's working on lots of different levels. If this flowered, just like the one down there, then that would also be a forage for other creatures. Just trying different things. I'm going to be using some sheet mulches this winter on top of the grass with black polythene, which is a temporary thing. It doesn't hurt the soil on a temporary basis. Over the winter it will all break down, then in the spring it will be ready for planting. And that's one way of doing it if you haven't got any compost, because if you're setting up, this is a big space, if you're setting up a big space, it's actually not humanly possible for most of us to afford to compost everything. I certainly can't. I budgeted for it, but I've composted my polytunnel, but I would be bankrupt and not paying the mortgage if I did all of that. So I've got woodchip, which came again from, sadly, the trees were a hazard and had to come down, but I'm using every bit of it that I can. And I'm using woodchip as a mulch on the paths. I'm using it to make some of the beds for perennials. You wouldn't put annuals in woodchip because woodlice can eat the annuals. And also I'm going to stack it and let it compost completely and use the compost. But that will be another year before that's ready. Down here, the soft fruit is mostly wood chip on cardboard on the weedy grass, and that will break down and that feeds the soil. And there's also more sheep dags. Now this was buried, but that's what the crows decided to do. They thought actually this looked a lot better. I think they just go on a mission. There was something in there that they liked. It's interesting seeing the way that the sheep's fleece, which would otherwise be burnt, so using it in this way is much better for the environment. And I'm in West Wales and we're surrounded by sheep.
There are a lot of sheep around here. There are a lot
of sheep here. It's interesting seeing that as it breaks down, how it almost is as if the fungi in the soil is reaching out to bring it in. You can sort of see how the fleece is going in. It's almost spooky.
Yes.
Or not, if you've got the crows that come along and do that. But the crows are really happy. They're well fed and cheerful.
Yeah, and you've got to be grateful for everything that comes into your garden and not try and chase it around.
They're full of whatever they're eating and they can add some poo. And you'll see that I've been doing this. Orchard hasn't been maintained for quite some time, and I've been doing some pruning, and log parts will be stored to mature, but all the twiggy bits I'm going to put through a shredder, and again that will produce browns for my compost heap, and also I can stack them up just as they are and let them rot down to produce compost. So using lots of different materials to make the soil, to build the soil in your garden, is offering different kinds of environments to the crows and everyone else who wants to come and visit your garden, but also for the soil flora and fauna and fungi and the bacteria and the nematodes. It's just creating a rich biodiversity, which is so important under the ground. We talk a lot about biodiversity above the ground, but what's happening underneath is actually the key priority. Everything else comes from that.
Thank you, Steph. I just have to say, possibly one of the most beautiful gardens I've visited in a long time. And she can pay me for that later.
I will.